Hi, my name's Ed Nolan and I'm a psychology teacher at Queen Elizabeth Sixth Form College, and today we're going to have a short video on how to evaluate the dysfunctional family's explanation of schizophrenia. So in today's lesson we should be able to give you 4 evaluation points. That's 5, let's try 4. 4 evaluation points and a conclusion. We should be able to come to a conclusion, getting ready for you to answer a 10-mark essay. Let's try this. So before we start, you can see the little pause button there. Every time, just press pause. I want you to see if, just to review what we learned in the last lesson about dysfunctional families, can you answer these questions? So press pause, see how many you can get out of 6. Right. So let's have a look. Who proposed EE? Of course, was the British psychologist George Brown. Just in case you're interested, he trained at the Maudsley Hospital, which was a sister hospital to Bethlehem, which was where we went on our visit for our psychology trip. The 4 aspects: communication, I remember, our critical comments, lack of warmth, hostility and emotional over-involvement, creating that negative environment with a high EE. So Vaughan and Leff found that 12% of low EE families, that the schizophrenics relapsed. Double-bind communication is a contradictory message, showing expression of love and also hostility as an example. Gregory Bateson talked about that they couldn't construct a coherent sense of reality. So coherent construction of reality, therefore creating later in life this idea that there is no sense of reality, and therefore things like psychotic episodes of delusions occur. And Berger had a retrospective study. Remember that they looked back at what had happened in the past rather than a prospective study, which would take people and look at how they developed as they went through their lives. Okay, so strengths and limitations of dysfunctional families. There are 4, we'll do that again, 4 evaluation points that we're going to look at and a conclusion. These are the convincing evidence. To be honest, I'm not sure how convincing it is, but there is evidence. Yeah, we know there's Vaughan and Leff for EE, and then we know there's Berger for double bind. So we have evidence there. The next one is a successful application, and that's through family interventions. Fiona Farrow, she's the one who brought that out. This idea that if you can successfully take an idea and apply it, it must mean that the idea is valid, that is good. Cause and effect is an issue. Is a high EE environment the cause of schizophrenia or the result of schizophrenia? And reductionism, our favourite old one there. Is it too simplistic just to focus on one area? Are we missing some important things out? And I put on there, what about biology? Because that obviously with schizophrenia plays a big part. Now you need to come up to a conclusion. Now the question marks are on the conclusion is because it is your conclusion. You think about it, you look at the arguments and sum up and say, look, are the strengths outweighing the weaknesses here, or the weaknesses outweighing the strengths? Right, so we're going to go through each point. I'm going to get you to do a little bit of thinking here. So I'd like you to press pause and have a look at the questions and see what you think. By the way, that's not my mum on the right. Okay, so let's have a look at this. What does this suggest? The Berger's research suggests? Well, it suggests that there is evidence to support the double bind communication idea. Yeah. That actually that the more double bind communications were occurring during childhood for schizophrenics and non-schizophrenics, it must play a part, surely. Okay. However, what we do need to look at is that when we compared it to other disorders, what Berger found is there was no difference. So actually, what we're saying is double bind communications can make people vulnerable to mental health problems, but that's not specific to schizophrenics. So yes, so schizophrenics had more double bind communications when they were younger. Well, so did people with depression or anxiety. So it makes us vulnerable to mental health. It's an environmental stressor, but it's not specific to schizophrenia. And that kind of, this invalidating the two kind of messages and not creating a sense of reality really questions that idea. It's also based on retrospective data. Okay, so looking back, so number one, is that reliable? If I was to ask you what happened when you were 10 today, if I was going to ask you tomorrow, and then if I asked you next year what happened when you were 10, would you give me the same answer? No, there would be a problem with consistency. But also, we're also looking at, we'll put quite a few alsos in there, we're looking at this idea, are schizophrenics valid? Is somebody who suffers from delusions, is someone who hallucinations, are they a valid participant to talk about their childhood? Particularly if things aren't going right for them, will they want to seek out reasons for this? More likely to identify those double bind communications, particularly if they're a little bit paranoid about their parents. So here we have some supporting evidence. Is it strong evidence? Right, let's have a look at Vaughan and Leff. Yeah, so we know that Vaughan and Leff found that relapse rates were much higher for those in a high EE environment. What does this suggest? Well, press pause. Let's have a look at those questions. Well, quite rightly, I was getting a bit excited then. Quite rightly, we'll say, well, this does give evidence. This shows that somehow a family environment plays a part in the onset of schizophrenia. This supports the idea. Okay, so, and also these findings aren't too dissimilar from Brown's. Remember, George Brown has right at the beginning where he interviewed his schizophrenics and identified those negative family environments. So if you've got more than one study showing the same thing, we're showing some consistency here, almost external reliability. Okay, so we're showing consistent findings. We're saying, well, yeah, we're pretty sure now that EE has an impact on relapse. What's not on here, what we probably might need to look at though, is when Vaughan and Leff went 6 to 12 months later, they found very little difference. So although initially EE played a part, later it didn't. So it must be much more complex than just family environments. Okay? Right. Okay. The second point, last point, sorry, third point, which point it is. This idea of, okay, showing relapse. So it shows relapse. It shows that when people go back in those environments, they therefore are more likely to go back to their schizophrenic if it's high EE. But does that tell us why the disorder occurred in the first place? Well, it doesn't. All it shows is environmental pressure that is around. And there could be any environmental pressure. So it really doesn't tell us the cause of schizophrenia, just what impacts on relapse rates. Right, have a look at the question, have a look in page 46, and we'll see what Joanne Liam has said. Okay, so this is an interesting point here. If you are living with someone with schizophrenia, that can be difficult. It can be difficult for any mental health issue. It's very difficult living with somebody whose personality has changed, is difficult, is unusual. You get frustrated with them. You might get hostile with them. You might become a bit more reserved and stand off from them. Yeah, you might be confused and might blame yourself. All of these are aspects of EE. So our question is schizophrenia the result of an EE environment, or does it cause it? And it's very difficult to tease that apart. The only way you could do that is to find people who don't suffer from schizophrenia, or look at young people and measure their home environments across a long period of time and see how many of them then get schizophrenia. That's called a prospective study. Very expensive, very difficult to do. So most of the research is quasi-experimental, comparing schizophrenics to non-schizophrenics, or people who have relapsed to those who haven't relapsed, and look at their home environments. So it's very difficult to tease about cause and effect. So are we certain that an EE is the cause of our schizophrenia? Right, have a look at the questions. So, dysfunctional families and reductionism. Reducing down to just the family is too simplistic. It's too simplistic. It's saying, right, well, we're ignoring lots of other aspects that are important. We talked about biology. I mean, we know when we looked at Griffiths and the dextroamphetamines, that changed and brought on symptoms very similar to schizophrenia. If we look at coal and antipsychotic drugs compared to the placebos, that reduced the symptoms of schizophrenia. We cannot avoid biology. It's really important. Likewise, you might say that about cognitive explanations about what's going on there. I'm not sure about psychodynamic. I'm not trying to leave Freud out of this one. But being reductionist, reducing it down is too simplistic. It might be part of the problem, but it's not the full. So, of course, that takes us to another explanation, the diathesis stress explanation. If you remember when Adrian Raine came in to speak to us at QE, he talked about this idea of the loaded gun, that actually the genetics, the biology aspect, put the bullet in the gun. But it takes an environment to pull the trigger. So someone might have a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia. The dopamine levels might be ready to go. But unless you put someone in that stressful environment, it doesn't happen. If they're in that stressful environment, that creates the problems with the dopamine levels, thus the positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So what more can you talk about environment when you talk about someone's home environment, a stressful home environment? So what we could say is stressful or dysfunctional families cause an environmental trigger for biological predisposition for schizophrenia. Useful applications. Okay, so we talked about Fiona Farrow. She took this idea of EE and said, well, look, can we help when schizophrenics have been treated? Can we help them out? And we can do that by working with the families, by reducing the anger that's shown, by reducing the hostility that's shown. That can give them more positive regard by educating the families. And so basically what you're doing is taking a high EE environment and turning it into a low EE environment. So by doing that, what they've found is it's been fairly successful. There's been successful with 53 random trials. They've found that this has been successful in reducing relapse rates. Right, what does that suggest? Well, if by changing family dynamics, family communications, or home communications, you reduce symptoms, this suggests that communications play a part in the symptoms. An application of a theory indicates the validity of it. Now remember, on this evaluation point, students usually just write, oh, it is a successful application. And in itself, that is an evaluation, but it's a weak point unless you're saying, well, look, this successful application shows validity of the. Let's now have a look at our conclusions, okay? And I suppose the question is, overall, are dysfunctional families a good explanation of schizophrenia? Well, let's have a look at some of the points. To work, there we go. So yes, we have evidence, backed up evidence, good. You make a judgment whether that evidence is valid, whether it's strong evidence. We can apply it, yeah? And so with an application, it shows validity. That must be good. But we do have a problem. Our problem is it blaming families? Is that a good thing? Is it ethical to do that? And to blame families, particularly when there are other factors that play a part. Okay, now this cause and effect is a real issue. Living with someone with schizophrenia may be the cause of dysfunctional family environments. Okay, now it is better than psychodynamic. If you notice, a very psychodynamic kind of theme to it. It is better than a psychodynamic explanation. It has more evidence, it has an application, so that surely is a strength. But the evidence, quasi-experimental, questionnaires, interviews, those kinds of things, Is that strong evidence? Does it really, can we really establish cause and effect from that? So it's up to you then to answer the question, do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? What do you think? Pop that in an essay. Talking of an essay, so let's have a little look at one. So what we've done is we've looked at our 4 evaluation points and we've looked at a conclusion. Hopefully you can make a point, you can put some evidence in there, you can explain them, you can even put some counter evaluation in there as well. So let's have a look at a essay, very straightforward. Evaluate 1 social psychological explanation of schizophrenia. Now, I've put in there 5 paragraphs. Now that might worry some people. I cannot do that. Well, that's okay. I mean, basically you've got your 4 evaluation points and a conclusion. If you can't put 5 paragraphs in there, we'll put 4. But me make decision then, do you put 3 evaluation points, if I get my fingers right, do you put 3 evaluation points in there, a conclusion? Do you put 4 evaluation points and mini conclusions? You work that one out. But quite simply is, A-star students will be able to write a lot, A and A-star, and they will write to detail. And they'll be clearly explained with a conclusion. If you're thinking, oh, I need a B or a C, I can then start reducing the number of points that I want to put in. Okay, so there are 4 points that you can put in your conclusion. There's your paragraphs, where you want to go. How much detail and depth is up to you. How you can do that in the timed condition, we'll have a look at. Okay, so make sure that your P, we've talked about that, point, evidence, explain. They're really quite important there. You can counter, and I'll put some counter evaluation points in there. You need 2 studies in there that we've got the Vaughan and left, and we've got the Berger study. You can pop those in there. Mini conclusions, just kind of summing up after each point can save you writing a full conclusion at the end. Okay, but if you do put a conclusion, remember in that conclusion, make a judgment. Do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses? Don't just sum up what you have put in your evaluation points. Make a judgment at the end, and that makes it nice, clear and informed. Okay, so you're now ready to write your essay. So that's all, folks. Just a little bit of a psychology joke at the end. Why does Pavlov have such soft hair? Because he uses classical conditioning. Hey, bye.